Welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversations, your channel for psychospiritual reflections and experiences. And now, to introduce you to our topic for today, here is your host, Kenneth Sorensen.
In this episode, I am happy to introduce you to Safira Bjørnø, a good colleague of mine. And we go deep into some of Safira's PhD findings concerning the treatment of alcoholics in the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We discuss the practice of surrendering to a higher force, which is part of what Assagioli called the feminine will. We also investigate the complex of subpersonalities that make up a pattern in relation to substance abuse. We share our transpersonal experiences in relation to psychotherapeutic work with clients, how we can call on help from inner helpers, and much more. Now let me introduce you to Safira. Dr. Safira Bjørnø is a psychosynthesis psychotherapist with a PhD in psychotherapy and a master's in psychosynthesis psychotherapy. She has been a trainer and lecturer since 2001, a supervisor, an external examiner for University of Southeast Norway, and a PhD supervisor. Safira trained as a psychosynthesis guide at Psykosynthesis Institute in Gothenburg and has later taught at various institutes in Scandinavia. As a researcher, Safira has specialist knowledge of addictions in general and substance addiction in particular, with in-depth knowledge of the dynamics of the personal will related to addictions. Special areas of interest are the autonomy and function of the will, transpersonal psychology with the integration of the transpersonal into psychotherapy practice, and professional development courses for psychosynthesis therapists. If you like this conversation, please like and subscribe to the podcast. It helps us to spread the wisdom of psychosynthesis. Now, without further ado, I bring you Safira Bjørnø. Hi, Safira, and welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversation. It's such a joy and privilege to have you on this podcast. And especially discussing or have a conversation about the 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous, which when I look into the 12-step, I think there's so much to go into and so much that is psychosynthesis related. And I know you we both live in Norway, and we have been acquainted for some time. We were both teachers at the Norwegian Institute of Psychosynthesis and have met during the years on many different events. So it's just such a joy to have you on board and hear a bit about your work. And if you could start our conversations today by telling a bit about your journey into psychosynthesis and hear a bit about you and your background.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
It's my first podcast, so it's very exciting. My journey into psychosynthesis started in 1995. But actually, I think it started already when I was maybe around 13 years old, because I've always been very spiritually searching. And already at the age of 13, 14, 15, I was reading philosophical books. So, the impulse was there already. And when I accidentally found a brochure at a friend of mine in 1995, I just knew that I needed to go that fundamentals course.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old were you at that time?
27.
Okay, that was quite young.
Mm-hmm. So, and that was in a place called Mullsjö in Sweden.
Yeah.
which was lovely, of course. And it was like, like a train locomotive was put on the tracks, and I've sort of been on those tracks since that time. And actually started the training the same autumn and finished in 99, and from there on it's just been developing. So I'm really
So
yeah,
the institute, was that the institute in Göteborg called the Psykosynthesinstitutet?
that's right.
Okay, yes. And it was a 4th-year training, as far as I recall.
That's right. 4 years, and then directly after that I was a teacher assistant for 2 years, and then we did they arranged for a course called Training to Train, so sort of an education to work with groups. And then I was offered to teach, and taught in the institute for many years.
Okay. And then you had, as far as I know, you have a PhD in psychosynthesis.
That's right.
And I have never heard about, of course I've heard about your PhD, but I think it must be very rare to have a PhD in psychosynthesis.
Well, it's with a few moderations, because the title is Doctorate in Psychotherapy by Professional Studies. So it's not a direct doctorate in psychotherapy, but it's a transpersonal doctorate. So indirectly, it's a doctorate in psychosynthesis, because I used transpersonal psychology as my context.
Okay, yes. And
So,
I guess this is what we're about to hear about, what you have been researching into. But perhaps I could hear a little bit more about how do you use psychosynthesis in your personal life? Before we go into the professional, is there any aspects of psychosynthesis that has been particularly relevant for you? It might subpersonalities, the meditations, or imaginary work, or do you have any preferences?
for my personal life, there are several aspects of psychosynthesis that has been very important and still are very important. Especially the concept of the eye, the point of the eye in the middle of the egg diagram. And the part of the description is a point of awareness and will, and presence and awareness of the will is very central to my life in any relation, I would say. And I think that is a huge gift, really, to that what we cultivate when we train as psychotherapists, psychosynthesis therapists, is the cultivation of the I, and the ability to be present with ourselves and the person that we are with,
Exactly.
either it's family or friends or clients.
Yeah. And have there been any aha moments in your journey where you in some way felt that, wow, this was an important understanding of the I, because the I is so central in psychosynthesis. It all starts and in some way ends with the I, because the I is also what leads us to the higher self or transpersonal self. So I really recognize this way, this approach you are speaking about. Has there been any development in your work with awareness training and the will? Can you say anything about that?
Absolutely. And then we actually touch upon what we were going to talk about later, which is the Alcoholics Anonymous, because I acquainted AA for short already in 2005 something,
Okay.
and learned to know about their philosophy and their spiritual foundation. And so there has been sort of a parallel and a synthesis between the two of them in my personal life as well, because in the AA program and philosophy, there is very profound spiritual principle, which is not that explicit in psychosynthesis in the same way, which is surrender. So from the realization of the I and the importance of I for the ability to be in the present and not drown in the fear of the future or history of the past. I'm actually using surrender at a daily basis. When I encounter some kind of resistance in myself, some sort of disappointment, some kind of difficult situation, I use surrender. And I could not have used surrender if I did not have that awareness and presence.
No, exactly. Oh, yeah. So I know that as Jolie speaks about the surrendering will as a way of underlining that the will is not just masculine. There's also a feminine will, and an aspect of that feminine will is actually this ability to surrender to something greater than yourself and have a trust in the connection that you establish when this surrendering is genuine. So it really resonates. So when you encounter some kind of an obstacle in your life or something that triggers your subconscious reactions, what is your technique, or what is your mode then when confronted with that situation?
Well, first, it's probably very, very human that I get angry or sad, or I react, and then I observe my reaction.
Yeah.
And more and more quickly, I'm able to choose to sort of make the decision to surrender and say to myself that I don't know how to solve this now at this point in time. I need to surrender this to the higher good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think that's illuminating, and so you can say that the more we have established ourselves as the observing I, and I like to call it the loving observer, because that's helped us accept what is present in our consciousness. But very often I really recognize, we can observe things, and we can also accept that we are acting in a way that it's not perhaps optimal, but this is just the situation right now, and I cannot, now I'm speaking about myself, and then I realize I cannot handle the situation. I'm just carried away by, it could be anger, or it could be sadness, or whatever. But I'm still observing. And I think this is the first foothold. This is the first, if we can learn to be there, being present to what is emerging in our consciousness and accept it, I think we really have created a very important inner space from where we then can start applying the will. And I understand that the first act of will in some way that you are doing is acting in a way to surrender to the situation.
Yes.
So there are many choices in such a situation. We could start fighting it, or we could start distracting ourselves, and we could start feeling powerless and succumb to that. But you act in a way, you choose your will, or by using your will, surrender to the situation. And what happened? What kind of state do you invoke when you surrender to?
That's really an interesting question, because it's sort of a paradox. So initially, I feel powerless in a certain situation, and I choose to surrender the situation to a higher power, as they say in AA.
Yeah.
Which for me feels empowering. So it sets me in contact with a sense of peace and release and humbleness. And it feels like, things get into a right order. That I position myself as part of a greater whole, and not as the queen of my universe, if I may.
Yes.
and by positioning myself in that way, I also, I guess the experience of being humble, which is a beautiful feeling, is very explicit, and my experience over time is that I actually, in some way, find a way to solve the situation that I'm in.
Yeah. So, how do you feel empowered? What's the nature of that kind of empowerment?
I think it is the trust that I have built in the spiritual principle and the experience I have had through the years.
Do you differentiate between a higher power, could be your own soul, when we use psychosynthesis terminology, or transpersonal self, but higher power could also be God, if one has that kind of perspective on reality. Do you differentiate between soul and God, or are you just open to some higher guiding principle?
Less and less, I would say, that I distinguish between my higher self and the universal self, or God, or unconditional love, or creative intelligence, whatever you want to call it. I think that it's the same impulse that comes through to me as an individual. For me personally, it's not important to distinguish between a higher self and a higher power.
No. Okay. So this is a core attitude of what you describe here, and this way of working with yourself and your approach to life is, for me, a core experience of psychosynthesis. I would say that you add the surrendering. I agree that it's rare that you hear this approach to surrendering in psychosynthesis literature, and I really think that it's a very, very important aspect of aligning between conscious I and higher powers or transpersonal self, because it expands your awareness from being attached to your ego consciousness, this contracted awareness that you are alone. Because whenever we are and also the conscious eyes, there is a sense of separation, even though it's more clear and it's more free, but it's still separated. And I think we need that leap of faith, this faith in something higher to expand our consciousness and let some light in from a higher source in many situations. And I really like the quality of humbleness and seeing yourself as in service of something greater, perhaps.
And that, especially when I sit with clients and encounter a situation where I'm not sure what to say, what to do, what kind of intervention I should use.
Yeah.
So then I quietly, inside myself, surrender the situation. And every time I get an impulse that is meaningful and turns out to be meaningful for the other person as well.
Yeah.
So it's such a wonderful tool, really.
So it is like when you send out some kind of an intervention, send an invitation to an intervention, then it's really, I have felt that many times too, that this attitude of believing that we can draw on some beneficial forces that support the setting, the client situation, and immediately when I just open up this call for help, you could also call it, then I really feel that something changes in the space. There is an opening, and it's not like, everything is just clear, but that's just a movement of a different type of energy that I'm not experiencing when I'm just forgetting about it and I'm just so absorbed in me and my client. There's something, an extra dimension that is so beautiful in this type of work when we have a transpersonal perspective on the client work. Okay.
And it's
Yeah.
it's always useful, and it's whether the client is open to the transpersonal or not, it doesn't matter.
No, exactly. Yes, exactly, because we are always allowed to draw on all positive energies to solve a solution, and I'm quite in agreement that the client does not need to agree in any of it. They are there because they want to work through some issues, and everything that helps, no matter where it comes from. So I like that approach. Do you have any? I just followed the flow now. Do you have any thoughts or conceptions about what is intervening? Sometimes we could have an understanding. I can say for my own sake, I believe that the client and I have helpers, inner helpers, and it could be guardian angels, or it could be the higher self in itself, but I have had some experiences with client work where I felt the presence of, I would say, an angelic being. Have you had any of these types of experiences?
Sure.
Sure.
I've had many kinds of spiritual experiences myself, both privately and with clients. And for me, this is not something that I can work at will. but sometimes I can see the deceased of the clients in the room.
Oh.
So, and or can hear them.
So the family members from the grandmothers and like that.
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that is particularly when clients are grieving,
Yeah.
and in a grieving process, that I'm sort of sometimes become a conduit to relay some kind of solace, warmth, love, which always brings, as you said, an extra dimension to the therapy.
Yeah.
But I'm always very cautious. It's nothing that it's nothing that I bluntly say to the client. I
No.
sort of ask them about their belief system, not to intrude on what they believe. But if the client is open to that kind of thought, I present it to them, and it always adds something positive to their process.
Yeah. Definitely. Wow, this is very, very beautiful. I'm also reminded of, the family constellations, the work with, when we work like that in a group where we can bring in these ancestral dimensions. And it's so, many people, especially if people don't have any understanding or belief in the afterlife, then it can be a very, very powerful experience to have such a presence of an old soul that you are connected to. So yeah, and I think this is, and even though we don't have to conceptualize it into any particular religious concept, because we find this type of experience. I would not call it belief actually, because it is, of course, there are beliefs about it, but they are related to direct experiences. And we find them in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Christianity, in Judaism, everywhere, have people have these types of encounters. And of course, a loving connection continue past this life. And if we are able to help people in their present situation from behind the veil, I have encountered this too, that a beloved grandmother becomes present in the therapy, and it's such a powerful. It's often a very dense feeling of love that really permeates the atmosphere, and I always start crying, and I'm getting touched now because I start thinking about some of these experiences, and it's so beautifully that we can help our loved ones from behind the veil.
And it always leaves me with a very profound sense of gratitude
Yes.
to partake in that kind of process.
Yeah. In some way, we become midwives between this life and the dimensions beyond. Midwives for important transformations, because people can be very, very stuck if they have lost a dear relative, and this sadness can be very limiting in their lives. So if they can have such a glimpse and feel such love, then it's easier to let go of this attachment, because life continues.
And additionally, I think it brings healing to the client
Yeah,
to
definitely.
release some of the pain that is that the client is carrying.
Yeah.
And with such an encounter, a sense of peace enters the room very often, and leaves the client with and sort of a new insights. And often it has to do with some kind of knowledge that, or understanding or insight that the deceased relative or friend still exist and is in a good place.
Yeah, exactly. Is there any of this that if we should, from this place, go to the work with the 12-step program, what would be the, you could, why did you become so interested in that modality? Was there anything happening in your life, or how did it caught your attention?
I think it when I did my master's dissertation,
Yeah.
I chose to investigate the lived experience of psychosynthesis and 12 steps.
Yes.
Because I got the opportunity to do two different essentials at an institution where I worked with the staff, and then I worked with the patients. Then I wanted to investigate the lived experience of the participants of that combination of psychosynthesis essentials and being in a 12-step institution. Which was very exciting indeed, because all the data points towards a happy marriage, so that the two therapeutic approaches enhance each other's.
Okay.
So it's actually a synthesis, the two traditions. So that was the basis of me going on with going in depth with the 12 steps. And it was especially a combination of frustration, actually, as I was working in a facility, detox facility for drug addicts, where we saw the same patients coming in and were detoxed and going out. And I started to question, what is happening with the will? What is happening with this personal will of an individual that wants help, gets help, and then goes out in the street and continues to use? So my approach to deepen that question was to look at the third step amongst the 12 steps.
Yeah, and perhaps for the viewers that don't know these steps, I have it here as far as yes. The third step sounds like made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So that's the surrender step.
Yes.
But it's also intriguing for me to think about who is handing over their life and their will to whom. So what will is at play in this step?
Yeah.
So that was what I wanted to investigate and learn from the lived experience of 8 interviewees.
Yeah.
So it was really an initiative to try to understand more about the dynamics of the personal will both in active use, going into treatment, and also, of course, during the 12 steps. So that was a very exciting journey.
So we have already now spoken about the surrendering will. So from that point of view, you could say that investigating this third step is actually an investigation into the process of surrendering. Is that correct?
Yep.
And what did you find?
Oh, I had so many exciting findings. So I made this interview schedule, and I included in my questions to the interviewees both their experience of being in active drug use, their experience of their will getting into treatment, and then their experience of their will going through the 12 steps. Because all of the 8 persons that I interviewed, 4 men and 4 women, were still active in the AA community, and they had worked with all the 12 steps, all of them, so they had personal experience.
Yeah.
And so what maybe the most exciting finding for myself was what I call the will complex. So when I analyzed the data, all the data and all the participants, or the definition of fikk jeg hjerneteppe, Kenneth? Et funn.
You're looking for a translation of
The findings.
yes.
The findings of the doctorate. And the will complex is, I found that the actual drug subpersonality, so to speak,
Okay.
consists of
Yes, continue.
Consists of 3 different subpersonalities.
Okay.
Which develop along a timeline. And underneath, the sort of the fuel that causes this dynamic and this movement into drug use is always trying to escape something, and then finding something to escape into. And what we escape from are pain.
Yeah.
So this impulse of escaping causes people to start escaping actually as often as children into sugar or mobile phone, series, training, exercise. And then it develops along the years. So many people think of substance addiction as it starts with the addiction of the substance.
Yeah.
But what I find is that it actually starts long before.
Yeah. So just to understand the process now, you say that there's the subpersonality, or there is a cluster of subpersonality that together forms the pattern of the alcoholic.
Yes.
And one of the subpersonalities is a personality that is in pain, that has some kind of a core pain, a core wound.
Yes.
And there's another subpersonality that guides the escape away from the pain and into some kind of abuse, be it sugar or other types of distractions from this core wound.
Yep.
So here we have 2 different types of subpersonalities. And there's also a third one, as far as I understood your
So
findings?
I named the first one the destructive intent of escapism.
Okay.
And the second one is the impulse that actually acts on the escape,
Yeah.
administer the use, plan, buy, execute.
Yeah.
And I call that the destructive omnipotent intent,
Okay. Why is it omnipotent?
because the way it was described for me from the 8 participants in the study was that it is think that it's right. Everything is everyone else's fault, and that I can do what I want. That is the mentality of that personality, and
Okay.
I step over boundaries if I need to.
Yes. Yes. So that really resonates that you call it an omnipotent subpersonality. I recall a concept of something called king baby. Is this the king baby that is the omnipotent?
That's right.
Okay.
I think it was. I cannot recall who said it, but the term was the majesty, the baby.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So, and the third subpersonality in this cluster is a subpersonality that develops quite late in a drug career, and that is when the total pain or the total belastning, the total.
Oh yeah, the total pressure of it all.
Yeah.
Yes, develops into.
A huge sort of life pain, livssmärta.
Yes, yes,
Because you during the use and the lifestyle that the use brings, you often lose your family, your children, your
yes,
job, your
yes,
health,
yes.
your teeth, your economy.
Yeah, it
Because
destroys everything.
yes, which causes an enormous pain, of course.
Yeah,
And through this, a new subpersonality develops, which has its own mentality, and it goes like this: if only I get a new boyfriend, everything will work out. If only I get a new job, if only I start to study, if only I go abroad. So if only.
yeah. So
If
it believes it can fix the situation by having some new experience
externally,
externally. Yes.
yes. So it's always externally. So
Yeah.
the gaze is always outwards.
Yes.
And then all the 8 participants described how they did exactly this. One got 4 jobs because then she thought she may control her drinking,
Yeah.
but she failed. And another one got a new girlfriend and thought everything was going to work out, and it didn't.
Yeah.
So they describe how they build a portfolio of failing.
Yeah.
And then the feeling of failing again and again and again creates more pain and the impulse to escape even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like a full circuit. It bites the first subpersonality in the tail.
Yeah. I see. So there is really a strong pattern of escapism
Yes.
in this. There's some pain that is too heavy to bear, and then you develop all these flight mechanism where you try to escape through drugs and through external activities.
Mm.
And this, of course, will re-enhance the original pain because of all the havoc that you have brought about in your life. That's a
Yeah.
really unhappy pattern to be stuck in.
That is the will complex of the active user.
Yeah.
And then, as these 8 persons acquainted Alcoholics Anonymous, they of course have their experiences from that journey. And what happened to all the 8 of them was that they met what they called the bottom, or the rock bottom,
Yeah.
which had 2 different expressions. And one was that they lost face. For example, one was driving his car with his 2 little children in the back and was stopped by the police and was, of course, not sober. But also the policeman was a friend of his father.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a total loss of face, which he needed to experience to get through his denial
Yes.
of that drinking was not a problem.
Yeah.
So that was one expression, and the other expression was when they stood on the brink of dying, or they understood that they had been in a situation that they just as well could have died.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they were faced with the question: well, am I going to live or am I going to die? And then maybe the most exciting part, Kenneth, for me was, and has such a parallel to psychosynthesis. They described a new aspect of will that sort of burst through after they had experienced the rock bottom, which was qualitatively very different from the will complex cluster,
Yeah.
which had qualities of willingness. It was not run by impulse, but they had the ability to see long term, which is very difficult when you're in active drug use.
Yeah.
Humility, openness, trust, and hope.
So, in some way, could you also describe it as some kind of a will to change?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I
Because
think,
because I understood it that they all had some kind of rock bottom experience that was forcing them to look at their denial, because denial is part of this pattern. As long as you believe you have no problem and you can just fix it by having a new girlfriend or whatever, then there's no change. You are stuck in the pattern. But this rock bottom experience gave them a breakthrough into, you called it, a new type of will, where there was hope and a more long-term projection of hope and change and betterment.
yes.
And so
And maybe most importantly, the ability to look within.
yeah,
So from searching solutions out there,
yeah,
not really to stop drinking, but to control the drinking. That was always their intention.
yeah,
But after rock bottom and the experience of what I named as the core wheel, with that came also a sense of maturity and access to a deeper wisdom, an ability to look within.
yeah,
Really fascinating.
yeah. And I think it's also highly relevant to say that they come into a group and meet people who have already been through that process, and these old now dry alcoholics, they see through all the denial. They because they have been there themselves, so they have this ability to, in some way, maintain the pressure of reality, the reality that you are in problems and you have this abuse, because I think there must be some kind of a battle. Such a strong addiction will not just go away from one day to another. There must be some kind of a prolonged struggle before the new will and the old will. There must be some struggles between these two types of will.
Absolutely. And you're so to the point. For what I found in my research was that these people, they met the rock bottom before they entered AA. And then when they entered AA, 6 persons out of 8 experienced a back and forth movement. Felt the pulling of the old patterns and the old subpersonalities, and then the pull in the other direction through the community, through the hope that it lives, is evoked through the person that have made it and who have become sober and been sober for many years. So for 6 out of the 8 persons, so there was a really long period of maybe a couple of years of doubt and not doubting and struggling to integrate the new qualities and the new outlook on life that the 12-step philosophy represents.
Yeah.
So for most people, I think it's a real struggle. For 2 of the persons, and that was quite fascinating, related to what we have talked about before in this podcast. 2 of the persons, they had spiritual experiences. One guy had sat with his sponsor and they did the prayer together, and he felt that he was filled with a kind of love that he had never experienced. And he described it as if his choice to drink was taken from him at that moment.
Okay. And who took that choice away?
Who took that choice away?
It's an open question.
Yeah. Well, from his belief was that it was a higher power.
Yeah.
And the other person was a young girl who had been in the community for a while and didn't really get it, didn't feel at home there, didn't feel that she understood what everybody else understood. And then she called out inside herself and said, God, if you are out there, I need help because I don't understand this. And she experienced that a beam of light came in through her forehead and down into her chest, and filled her with incredible light and love. And she also said, at that moment, the choice to drink was taken away from me. And I think that's a really fascinating phenomenon.
Yeah, really. It's really an interaction or an intervention from a higher power of some sort. How would you describe the importance of the group? Because I think AA is famous for these meetings, where people, they attend regularly and speak about their process, and it's also something we know from group therapy, but this is more informal. How would you describe the importance of the group work?
I think there are many aspects of the format that is really special to AA. One is that you can be anonymous. And through that, you sort of get some sense of security that you will not be exposed, you will not be shamed, you will not experience the same kind of stigma that you experience outside of the group.
Exactly.
And everybody, every member of the group is themselves an addict, whether they have been sober for a long time or not. So, and they exercise what I would call transpersonal qualities of equality, of friendliness, of inclusion, of understanding, of patience, of hope. And part of their philosophy is that they do a sharing round, and you don't have to share. You can share, but you don't have to. And you share your struggles around your addiction. And even if you've been sober for many years, you still share what you struggle with as an addict and your way out. And the intention of doing that is to help newcomers to see that, oh, if that person struggled with that thing, then it's hope for me as well.
Yeah, exactly.
He was worse out or she was worse out than me, then it's hope for me as well. So it's instillate hope in the newcomers.
Yeah. How do you relate to, I've read some criticism about, the concept of the belief that you will always be an addict, that this is something that you cannot control yourself. You need a higher power, and you need the group. And there's been some criticism toward that point that you can get stuck in a sub-personality, that you keep identifying and seeing yourself as an addict even though you're not drinking, and this should be some kind of a limitation for you. How do you respond to that kind of critique?
I have been wondering about the same question myself. But what I have come to understand as I delved more into the philosophy and have been to a few open meetings and learned to know in depth many persons who are active in the community, their experience is more like a constant reminder of the illness that they have, because it's seen as an incurable illness.
Yeah.
And there has been many examples of people who have been sober for many years, 10, 20, 30 years, and then starts to use again, and it's a very short time period before that person is back into much worse.
Yeah.
So the time travel is on. It doesn't secure you from becoming an addict again.
No.
If you do taste alcohol or drugs. So I think it's not just a belief; it's an experience of seeing comrades or fellows starting to use again and then losing everything.
Yeah.
And then even their lives often.
Reflecting on it from a psychosynthesis perspective, perhaps we could, I don't know if it's an illness or not, perhaps it is a very strong psychological pattern we could call a sub-personality, an addict. And I think it's important to remember that the person is much more than that single sub-personality. And if we can help a client with that type of problem to see that even though, yes, they go to these meetings and they identified with being a dry addict, then they are much more than that. They are also a father or mother, they are a husband or wife, they are a teacher or whatever professional role they have, and 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 essentially all these roles that they play, they of course they have to play them authentically, but essentially they are the loving witness, the loving observer. And if we can help them find that that essential beingness within themselves, then I can see that it's perfectly okay to live with, live with the sub-personalities in you that you know is so powerful and so strong, almost like, an unruly horse or some beast that you really have to have in some kind of a strict containment. And if you have that um, part of you in strict discipline, then you can live happy, free life, even though you have that part of you under your control in some way. So I don't think it has to be a big limitation in a person's life if we look upon their personality as containing a multitude of different aspects and character traits. Then it's just that we have this dangerous part of me I just have to be vigilant about. How does that sound in your ear?
I can recognize your description, Kenneth. The expression they use themselves is a hibernating bear, like a bear sleeping in a cave and can
Yes.
be awakened at any time. But the part of the beast has a tendency to change shape. So the behavior changes from using a drug to eating too much or too little, or becoming a sex addict, or exercising too much. So if the inner work that they really go in depth with the 12 steps, if you just arrest, you stop drinking and stop using drugs and try to go on in your life without doing the 12-step work.
Yeah.
It's called you live on white knuckles. You try to keep yourself on a steady road, but you're tempted into the behavior drags you sort of into different lanes.
Yes.
So the behavior continues.
Yeah.
So it's huge work in itself to be open to new how the psyche tempts you into new lanes of addictive behavior.
Yeah. And from a psychosynthesis point of view, we can say that it's a very dominant desire function. And we all have, it's the problem of all of us. All human beings have desires. But there is some people with extraordinary strong desires that needs to be perhaps not controlled is correct, but it's a bad it has a bad rep. But it must be disciplined in some way, because this desire, and perhaps it's an underlying desire for love, and perhaps I in my own life I've found that I have some desires can never be satisfied by external means, because they have some kind of a divine origin. It's some kind of a longing for a divine marriage, or to speak in mystical language, it's a longing for connecting with your source. And this type of spiritual longing and longing for to be one with complete love or whatever, it can be masked and turned into all kind of superficial desires if you don't know that it's actually something that lives inside of you. And sometimes I call it's some kind of a incurable wound in some way. You can heal it a bit by meditating, by surrendering to something higher, to have a practice where you continually work with that, strengthening your inner connection to God or whatever you choose to call it. In astrology, we have a it's not a planet, but it's a asteroid called Chiron. And Chiron is an incurable wound you have. It will never be healed, but out of this pain, wisdom develops. And in some way, I could see this problem. In some cases, I believe, especially because there is a strong spiritual element in AA, that some of these people can have on an essential ground a longing for God, or a longing for a mystical experience, or coming home to the source, or how you would like to describe it. How does that sound?
I think that's very true. That essentially that's a longing for everyone, every human being, either you're addicted or not.
Yeah.
But it is enhanced, of course, in AA, also because they use prayer.
Yeah.
They use the term God. It is not to be confused with the biblical God, because it's defined differently. But they use the term for their higher power.
Yeah.
So it's it's named, it's present, it's a part of the program. So if they open up to the program and doing the step work, then they also open up to discovering their own spirituality.
Yeah.
So it's extremely profound program, and the concept of being a group. There are no therapists. They're just people like you. And it's your own free will that takes you there. That fascinates me as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's only free will.
Yeah, and the free will, that there's this, we have to choose it again and again and again, because by choosing this, surrendering, if we should say this is the medicine, surrendering to some higher power, because every time we choose it, we direct energy into it and strengthening the channel or the inner connection that we are building through this activity. It has been a great help and insight for me to know that there are some types of pain that I will not be able to totally let go of. They serve me in a way that it keeps me in the fire. It keeps me in the practice. It keeps me doing the work. And so the job now is more to create a loving space, accept it, that I have pain within me that will not be healed, but I can see the positive outcome of it. And of course, sometimes I forget that what the pain is about, and then I eat too much chocolate or whatever I choose as an escape. But I think the knowledge, and if you have seen it again and again that it works like that, I think we can start having some gratitude toward that type of pain, because it helps us transcend different types of limitations.
Mhm. Absolutely. But I think there are even more aspects in play with people who have been suffering from severe alcohol addiction or drug addiction, which is the loss of self-worth.
Yeah,
So that is part of a huge part of the work.
yeah, I
For
agree.
if I have no worth, how can I be worthy of love?
Yeah,
How can I be worthy of God's gaze? So that is also a big part of the journey, because what I've seen is that it's painful to be live an addicted life, but it's also painful to open up their own heart to themselves and start to believing in the self and start to believing that they're worthy of the patience and the friendliness and inclusion that they do meet in the AA fellowship. So there are many things at play in the healing process.
yeah, and there is some of the steps that are related to forgiveness, as far as I recall.
Mhm. And
Could
that
you?
they ask the higher power to lift up of the burdens of their character defaults,
Yeah,
as they frame it. Yeah, but it's also part of their philosophy to ask forgiveness from the higher power, to learn to forgive themselves.
wow, this is such a rich work, and we could speak about this for hours and hours, I'm sure. Um, is there anything you would like to add? Anything important we haven't been around in relation to this work?
I think seeing after I've been able to go in depth with 12 steps philosophy and being a psychosynthesis therapist, I think that we have, or that at least 12 step can remind us of something that is not so maybe so much practiced in psychosynthesis, which is the ritual use of gratitude, of prayer, and of um, instilling hope. And so, to conclude, returning to my doctorate, what the last finding that I did was that sort of confirmed the transformation that these persons had been through, was that 7 out of 8 persons, they had an aversion against God and religion. They could not relate to that at all. And after going through these 12 steps, I think it was 2 of them who chose to baptize and convert to Christianity. And all of them described how that they did what they were recommended, even if they didn't believe it. So they did their prayers and they did their lists of thankfulness and daily reflections, even if they didn't believe it. And what they experienced over time was as they experienced as if someone was helping them.
Okay.
So after going through all the 12 steps, their attitude or their belief was that they did get help from somewhere, and that they did not want to stop praying. They did not want to stop with their gratitude attitude, because it gave them so much pleasure.
Yeah.
And that's a 180-degree shift, which is really fascinating and which can be accomplished within a couple of years in the AA.
Yeah, that's really marvelous. Yes, and as usual, I ask the people I speak to if they have some kind of exercise that they love and that you could show me and the listeners. And have you anything in mind you would like
I actually
to
have.
try?
I think it would be suitable to do a short meditation around surrender.
Wow, yes, I would really appreciate that.
So, so I invite you and the audience to sit
Yes.
back and close your eyes and take a couple of deep, comfortable breaths. And feel that you can land more and more inside in your inner space. Into your peace and silence. And let yourself observe with a soft and loving gaze yourself. And ask yourself if there's anything in your life that creates resistance or tightness, anger, resentment. And if you do get in touch with any kind of resistance, ask yourself if you're willing to let that go, if you're willing to imagine that you hand it over. So it's out of your hands and it's carried by a higher consciousness, it's carried by unconditional love, by infinite intelligence. So let yourself hand it over if you are willing. And then observe how that affects you. How it affects you emotionally, how it affects you physically, and how it affects your thoughts. observe the qualities that you get in touch with. And know that at some point in time, you will know how to move on in relation to your situation. You will receive impulses, ideas that help you. And observe in yourself your willingness to trust that. And know that this is something you can do at any time, in any situation in your life. So I invite you now again to release your focus, take a couple of deep breaths, and in your own time, turn your attention to back to here and now.
This was a very interesting experience. I have a subpersonality that works out of anger. And I know a bit about it. It really wants peace. So when I start working on things that I really enjoy working on, then this angry subpersonality just starts to, let's get it over. You know, it's some kind of, you know, it really presses me and stresses me, you know, make me work too hard and disrupt the good, joyful energies. Because there is this, the faster I can do it, the better from this perspective. So I had a conversation with this part of me if it wanted to. I also asked myself if I wanted to let it go, because it can be very, very productive. But it just stresses me and creates a disharmoniously condition in me. And but it decided to start the process of letting go, and then I felt some kind of a feminine presence, you know, like a really gentle, almost like an energy of rose.
Wow.
And this energy of rose, very, very sweet, tender love. And it was exactly the thing that this angry subpersonality longed for. But it was like, it was still, you know, hanging on to my shirt. It was not ready to let go, but I could see its gaze and it start feeling this beautiful feminine energy. So now I know as soon as I understand what the psychological medicine is,
Mm.
then I know I can start the process
Yeah.
of letting go of it.
Wow. Okay, that's really profound and so moving.
Yes.
Fantastic, really.
I would really love to be able to work without this anger.
Mm.
Work more from being.
Sure.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank
Fantastic.
you. Yes, thank you so much for this exercise. And I would also like to ask you, if people want to get in touch with you and your work, where can they reach out to you? Of course, I can link to your email if you like, or your website address.
Yeah.
Is there anything?
It's what's most convenient to the one who wants to get in contact. You can use my email or my phone number, or go into my website and send me a message from there. So
You live in Norway and outside Oslo, as far as I know. And what type of work are you offering? What type of services?
I work with individuals mostly, psychotherapy. I work also with therapists who need psychotherapy or need supervision.
Yes.
And of course, I work with people who are struggling with addictions of different kinds, and not active users mostly, but individuals who have started their journey into sobriety. And I work from the perspective of 12-step and psychosynthesis.
And is this work also available online?
Yep,
Okay.
it is indeed.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So if people live in England or California, then they can reach you via your website and have online sessions with you.
Absolutely.
How about teaching? And you are a very experienced teacher, I know, for many years. Are there anything particular you like to teach?
Well, I love to talk about the will, and I love to talk about the transpersonal, and I love to talk about addiction, of course, and working with addictions. That's from the top of my mind.
Yeah.
But I also really enjoy supervising. I used to do that more in groups before, and so that's possible too. I do also not trainings, but workshops for professionals. So
Yes, there are lot to dive into. I will, of course, make your website, your email, phone number available in the description for anyone to look up. And I would just say a big thank you. I'm so grateful for your presence and the way you present psychosynthesis. And I can really see how the AA and the 12-step program has much to offer psychosynthesis, and especially the surrendering will. This was perhaps, I think, one of the most important insights I took from this conversation with you, how important it is. And thank you for the exercise. And yeah.
And thank you, Kenneth, for inviting me, for giving me the opportunity, but most of all for our exchange. I really enjoyed our exchange and how interesting and pointed questions that you had for me. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to Psychosynthesis Conversations. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and help us to spread the wisdom.